So I'm going to talk about a study that our Global Insights team conducted at the end of last year, and also features obviously Australian results, which is what I'll talk to today. So it was about people's perception of their own representation in TV shows and in movies. And I think really applicable to some of the guys in the room. So it was a global study, as I said, about 15,000 people globally and 1,000 in Australia, and that was conducted obviously online as it was COVID, with some video interviews also. So what we found first and foremost is that representation matters to Australians. 74% of Australians believe that it's important that TV shows and movies offer diverse representation. But more importantly, those numbers are higher among certain groups. So I think the focus of today's event in part is about LGBTQIA+ Australians. 77% of Australians of that group believe representation is important, as do people from more diverse backgrounds, and even higher among First Nations people. So it's important to these groups that they are represented on screen. Do they feel represented on screen? The answer, unfortunately, not really. About 23% of Australians feel they're poorly or very poorly represented on screen. 29% are kind of in the middle, and the rest do believe they are either fairly or well represented. But it's that 23% that I think is really unfortunate, and we're going to dive a little bit into that today. The reasons why they feel poorly represented in TV shows and movies are diverse, just like they are. The number one, as you might expect, is race and ethnicity, followed by age, country of birth, gender, where someone lives is a reason why they may not feel represented on screen. Economic status and religion are also up there. Disability, sexual orientation and gender identity also round out the rest. So it's a varied list of reasons, which is one of the key findings of our study. It's not, people don't just describe one reason why they don't feel represented. And these reasons are stronger among certain groups. So 36% of the overall population say they're not represented because of their race and ethnicity, but among First Nations people, that number is 69%. Age is a reason for 26%, but interestingly, it's 71% among 13 to 17-year-olds. So teenagers don't really feel represented in TV shows and movies. And we get to some of probably the more sadder stats. So 16% of people say their sexual orientation is a reason they don't feel represented, but among LGBT people, that's 56%. Among transgender people, 46% of those who don't feel represented say it's because they are transgender. So there's clearly a lot more work to do in some of these groups on the screen. And this is a really interesting slide, and it's a very big word, so I hope I pronounce it well, but the more intersectional, marginalized identities that we have, the less well represented we feel. So if you don't ascribe to any of the marginalized identities that we asked about, if you're a straight, rich, white male in a great suburb, you feel pretty well represented. The more marginalized identities you add to someone, the less well represented they feel, and that falls down to 28% of people with 4 or more marginalized identities don't feel represented on screen.
So Gareth, this is a pretty big slide. Let's unpack it a little bit. So you're saying, one marginalised identity, so that could be being gay, but also if you are a cisgendered white man, financially secure with a non-disabled, which is kind of
I feel attacked.
Which is you.
Yeah.
Do you feel represented on screen?
I honestly do, yes. I'm gay, but the gays on screen are typically handsome. No. They're affluent gay couples who live, as we were discussing before, in a place that looks a bit like this, like a nice loft apartment in New York City, having fun with their friends and going partying. That's one. So
gay men are kind of mainstreamed.
Yeah, they're
now.
mainstreamed.
And usually we see them as hot gay men.
Yeah, hot gay guys. Yeah.
And hot lesbian couples that live in like
folk.
New York loft apartments.
Yeah.
But that's not how it is. That's not how. Not everybody is, financially secure. And if you come from a faith background where you've where you do feel attacked, and you've got, some people are ostracised, even though they've kind of risen above. Like, where is that accounted for? Like, there's so many people.
It's never on TV.
It's never on TV.
If you're a black trans person, if you have a disability, people with disability are really not represented on screen at all in many shows. And if they are, it's the only reason they're on the show to begin with.
Yes, correct. And has anyone seen Heartstopper? That Heartstopper, isn't that so beautiful? Stop crying. There are all of the characters are in this slide in that show, but they're not talked about for the trans actor isn't playing. There's never acknowledgement of the trans character that they're playing. So that's where the representation comes in.
Yeah, agreed. And that ties into some of the other points in the study is that individual lived experiences do rarely fit neatly into boxes. So 44% of lesbian, gay or bisexual people we spoke to feel poorly represented for a reason other than their sexuality. Obviously it's part of it, but they could also be a person with a disability, they could be from a less affluent background. So it's important to understand the complexity of people's lives. The reason it's important is because representation has an impact on the real world. 68% of people who are poorly represented on TV shows and movies say it leaves them feeling unimportant, ignored, or disappointed. And even more sad, it leaves people feeling defeated and distanced. It impacts their self-esteem and confidence, it impacts their sense of belonging, and to them it even impacts their opportunities available in life to them. So it has real world impacts. It's not just to make everyone feel good when we represent on screen. Important is the accuracy of the representation. So obviously the most important thing is being represented. 64% of people say that people like them aren't represented enough, but a similar amount, 54%, say it's because people like them are represented inaccurately. So it's about having authentic portrayals, often informed by the people themselves behind the scenes, is really important in order to tick, finally, the box of representation for that group. And we in the media, or we in media agencies, play a key role in shaping positive views towards groups. So the most important reason why you might have a positive view towards a marginalised group is because you know someone from the group. You know you have a gay brother, you have someone in your family has a disability. Very close behind is media representation and celebrity acceptance, and close behind that is seeing or reading news coverage related to those groups. And really far behind is the opinions of your friends and family. And what's interesting here is that the media are twice as influential as your friends and family in shaping positive views. So we have a responsibility to act.
Yeah, I always thought it was the other way around, that the people closest to you, but the people closest to you don't really care about their opinions. You don't listen to them.
Yeah, it's kind of, you have to personally know someone and that works, but if it's just your dad's opinion about...
that's. I think we can all relate to that, or my mum, actually.
Yeah, you just kind of it's noise. But if a celebrity like Narelda Jacobs supports something, then it's different. And I'll leave you with a final stat, which I think underscores the urgency of why we should act and why particularly Paramount is acting quicker than we have. Is that while most people who feel poorly represented believe that representation has improved, more believe it's gotten better than gotten worse in the last 5 years. In the past year, more believe it's gotten worse. So we're clearly not doing enough as an entertainment industry to change this. I'm going to leave you with a short video about some of the programs we have on air that we're really proud of showing diverse representation. But I think it's also important to understand we have other shows that allow for diverse representation just because of their subject matter. A show like MasterChef, we don't intentionally cast for certain groups, but food is a universal theme. So there's ways to have universal themes in shows that allow for representation without being overtly throwing in diverse characters just to tick a box. I think that's really important.
Being the Bachelorette, I get teary, I get emotional, I get goosebumps because I'm the first Indigenous bisexual Bachelorette.
What is it like to be an adolescent?
A hurricane in slow motion.
Everyone says it's one of the weirdest stages of life. It's confusing and lonely and overwhelming.
This was not what I'd imagined for my life. Buying a family home, yes, but I'd imagined buying it with a family. I hadn't imagined my gay best friend, a middle-aged nurse, a pregnant woman, or a tradie. I walked into this arrangement convinced it would be a disaster, and I walked out convinced it was a 1 in a billion connection.
What are we doing today? An STD check?
The condom broke. He tested HIV positive Monday.
How long does somebody have to wait? 90 days.
Do you ever wonder what you would do if the test came back?
No, I try not.
I'm not really sure how I'm feeling.
And I think that's okay.
The barriers that have been broken just by doing this, I think is huge.
Oh gosh, that makes me feel proud to work there. We should all want to work at Paramount. You walked past someone that was in that video just the
I
other day.
walked past Troye Sivan the other day and I was...
Did you say anything to Troye Sivan?
What could have been? I don't know.
Gareth, you mentioned that people in the last year aren't happy with the progress of diversity that we're seeing on screen, but over the last 5 years, it's been okay. But what about before that? There was. I feel like we. I don't know. Like when I was in my 20s, and there was like Queer as Folk, and then afterwards like the L Word, and we were just used to. And then even before that, like Degrassi High, those types of shows. That was so progressive. And then what happened?
Don't know. John Howard got elected. Everything went wrong. But it's true. I think it shows that for things to change, companies do have to take a really strong position to really change it. So whether that's quotas on creators to make sure that First Nations people or female directors and creatives are making things, I think is really important. It just shows it's not going to happen if you don't do anything.
But we did laugh when you said John Howard got in, but we became more conservative. It was actually true. We did become more conservative, and that was impacting the shows that we made, the things that we saw. And now, when you look back at old ads during that time or programs, and you didn't see any diversity, you notice it now.
Yeah,
you notice
sure.
what was lacking, what was missing.
And shows like Degrassi when some of us were growing up, which were groundbreaking, and then there was kind of a pause. And now, thankfully, there's more diversity on a lot of shows now. And
I kind of think, that we feel like we haven't gone far enough just in the last year. That is telling. And, and the result of the election as well. But what do people want? Like, over the last 5 years, we've been travelling okay, but have we been stalling over the last year, or what? Yeah, how far?
It was hard for us to unpack why, but I just think the fact that even those two numbers were quite close together, the people who think gotten better or gotten worse, it wasn't a conclusive victory for better over the last 5 years either. I think underscores there just needs to be much more focus on this across the entire entertainment industry. So, which stat stood out the most for you? I think that stat that things haven't gotten better, but I think it's the confusing pie charts about the multiple identities that people have that are often not represented on screen, and even down to things like beyond race and ethnicity or sexual identity, things like income, that poor people aren't really well represented on screen. And then the type of person that we put on screen from those marginalised communities, Dylan Alcott puts it so beautifully and articulately when he says, you have to be exceptional to be able to be respected as a person living with a disability, or you have to be exceptional as a First Nations person. And it shouldn't be that way. No. We shouldn't have to put a Paralympian on screen to represent people with disabilities, because that's not the reality for everyone. No. Even Paralympians do say that. Yeah. Don't put us on a pedestal and expect everybody else who live with a disability to be the same, because it's not possible. We dedicate our entire lives to this. Yeah. So Narelda, you've worked in TV for 22 years. Yeah. At a variety of networks now too, not just Channel 10. So how have attitudes towards putting particularly LGBTQIA+ Australians on air, how had that changed in the past while? Oh, well, it used to be a secret. It used to be something that you were ashamed of. And I was the presenter I was the Sandra Sully of Perth until I moved over here in 2020. And when I got the Sandra Sully job, the presenter's job, I was a journo before that on the road. And it was we did profile pieces in the papers to kind of introduce me. And it was a decision that the network made. Okay, you can come out. They kind of made the decision for me. And it did go to the highest echelons of the network to make a decision on my public coming out. And which, I'm so happy that I did that. That was in 2008. Because then I didn't have to live in fear and shame of living this kind of secret and it being gossip. Like it wasn't gossip.
then, but there's a lot of media identities after that were still living in the closet publicly. And privately to their friendship groups, and it was very well known. And up until recently, Patricia Karvelis never mention that she was a queer woman until she was on Insiders. I think it was only just last year. I think it was really recent, and she talked about the gay community, and she said, and I am gay, and it kind of came out. She didn't plan to say it. And like I always knew PK is a queer woman, but that was the first time she outed herself to the public, and so it was that recent. And she probably thought she didn't need to, but there's so many gay people on screen that aren't out and that don't talk about it publicly and don't kind of declare their sexuality because they don't feel they need to. It's irrelevant to their job. But in terms of visibility, how good would it be? I think to know.
For sure, it's important for people to see those role models too. So on 10 News, on Studio 10, which you're also a host of, what's been the most what story has been you've been the most proud of in terms of representing groups?
It's got to be the marriage equality debate. Gosh, that was such a momentous day. But just being proud of a network that took a stance on marriage equality and did their best to be able to tell the stories of the people whose lives it would impact the most. And we now know that it doesn't impact the people who voted no, having marriage equality. So, just the pride that I felt by working for a network and actually being in the stories. On the day of the yes vote, I was actually in the story that we ran in Perth. So that gave me immense pride.
And where could we as a TV network or other commercial news outlets, where could they improve in covering particularly LGBTQIA plus Australians?
Take the politics out of it. There are certain stories where there is no politics involved, and you don't have to be a devil's advocate. And I think that's what we've seen through the Uluru Statement debate. There is actually, and again, like Marriage Equality, Network 10 supported marriage equality, and we also support the Uluru Statement. And I think you can in principle support the Uluru Statement and then look at the question that's going to be put to the Australian people in a referendum. But for a network to stand up and support First Nations people self-determining their future and destiny, I think is just fantastic. And there is no politics. I don't see this as a political story, and this is the thing. Like when it benefits the most vulnerable, there is no politics about it. You're impacting people's lives. The whole trans in sport debate during I'm just so glad that the outcome of the election was as it was, because if it wasn't, and if that strategy actually won, jeepers, like what would that have done for seeing D&I on screens?
Yeah, correct.
Yep. So there's so much more we can do, but I think just telling good stories as they are, they're good positive stories, and not trying to provide what we think is the balance, because we've heard that narrative for so long now.
Yeah. And then I think too, it's reflecting people's lives. Often you see the gay community represented on the day after Mardi Gras. That's the story. It's the Mardi Gras story. It's showing people in elaborate costumes, often very hot people in elaborate costumes, and that's not the reality of a typical LGBT person. Well,
even something like, when we do Vox Pops in news a lot, and the people, so it's up to the journo and who's around to be able to Vox Pop. But usually, over the years and over the decades, we've seen a certain type of person being Vox Pop. Well, now we see people of different faiths, people of different BIPOC people. So we need to have the representation everywhere in the commercials that we see. I mean, what do you think we could do?
Well, I think that's a great point. The commercials are often quite a large part of a TV program. 8 minutes of a half-hour show is commercials, and I think, yes, it's on companies like Paramount, companies like Nine to do more on diversity and do that globally too, but it's also the advertising we see has to be better representative. That is particularly where, the pretty lesbian couple get a feature in the ad, or the hot gay guys get a loan from the bank, but you don't often see a disabled trans person in an insurance ad.
And not because they're living with a disability and they're trans.
Correct, yeah.
It's kind of it's just putting them in normal situations. And we don't have to get a trans person to talk about trans issues. We don't have to, only talk to a First Nations person about First Nations issues. I think that's the beauty of programs, panel shows where everyone's from a marginalised community. Like, we don't have to be the balance anymore, because the balance, what we have thought was the balance, has been lopsided. It's been all we're doing by including marginalised communities is just kind of correcting the balance. Like, we're actually just making it balanced now because we were outweighed before. I think that's the beauty of the direction that we're heading.
Yeah. Are there any questions from the crowd? I think there is a microphone.
I'm armed with a microphone, so.
This one.
I can yell.
Oh, hang on. Oh, God. Okay. Yes.
Cool. First of all, thank you guys. It's been really interesting, so thank you for sharing. Coming from the perspective of an advertising agency, I think it's really interesting what you've just touched on there. And I think TV has gone further than what advertising has. I think there's unique challenges to what advertising can do and who the stakeholders and clients and things are that we face. I'm wondering, do you think commercial networks have a role in helping advertisers do that job as well? Like, can networks be holding advertisers to account more?
It's a very interesting idea. I think, in a part, we should, because we're responsible for what's on air. So we get complaints about ads because we're the ones showing them. So we bear the upside and the downside of any ad that airs. So I think it's a really interesting point. You could have we have a no diversity, no commission policy at Paramount, which means things have to be diverse, either behind the scenes or on the scenes to do. You could apply the same to ads. It'd be quite scary, I think, for our revenue, maybe. But I think that's an interesting point. We would take a revenue hit if we did that on TV, whereas when you're making shows, you don't necessarily take a revenue hit for being diverse. But yeah.
And it's about embedding into the business, isn't it? Into every aspect of the business, and not just on air. For example, it is Reconciliation Week, and we have a wrap, and we've elevated our wrap quite fast. We've kind of doing so many amazing things. And we're embedding cultural awareness and cultural knowledge into everything, and not just on air, which is why, when we do acknowledgements to country, it's not just, a tokenistic thing. It's, we've got a presence in every department, which is just, it makes me so proud to see how far we've gone. And, the rap community is a huge community. There are millions of Australians who work under a rap, and Paramount's just one of them. And, so that's a growing community. And I think that's an example of lifting each other up, and saying, well, where are you in your rap? And having accountability that way. And I think it's the same thing with queer issues.
Yeah, for sure.
I've got another question.
The commercial networks have a system called Clear Ads, which enforces the Australian Broadcasting Act standards. Is there any opportunity for the commercial networks to put in guidelines there so that you don't clear any ads that are using, say, toxic or misleading stereotypes?
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, it's not my responsibility to give Channel 10 the tick there, but I think it's important. I also think it's important when agencies and clients are placing commercials for brands that, there are a lot of brands who've taken a big stance on diversity, and then you may see an ad of that brand run on a platform like Sky News. It might run in a non-diverse show. And just as we use context to inform what brands are in sport, where beer ads, gambling ads, always in sport, I think there's probably a place too when placing ads to make sure that we're supporting the programs that are diverse, because sometimes they don't rate as well. It's the unfortunate nature of programs on SBS, on 10, that do take that step forward but then aren't supported commercially. We have a great show coming up next year called The First Inventors, about First Nations communities inventing things, thousands of years before, and it would be great to see, demand for sponsorships on that be as strong as demand for sponsorships in Friday Night Footy or MasterChef, I think. So I think it is both ways. I think the idea of kind of enforcing some sort of diverse standards in commercials is a good one, in partnership with the AANA and everyone else too, obviously.
I've got time for one more question. Oh, great. Hand up straight away. I'm living my school teacher fantasies.
I don't know any school teachers who are as cool as you with your pants. So, thanks so much, guys. It's been a really good discussion. I just had, a bit of a question and more guidance from you. I see, National Reconciliation Week. We've got NAIDOC Week coming up. It's Pride Month, and a lot of organisations do a job of really elevating, supporting, and celebrating in that particular time frame. But I'm a big believer in it's what we do most of the time, not some of the time. And I do observe a little that it kind of diminishes the impact that we're actually able to have. So do you have any advice to individuals and organisations who can really elevate that 365 days of the year, not just for these bespoke moments in time?
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a really wonderful way to end, and that's where embedding it into your core business comes in. So it's so important because we're very, like First Nations people and queer people are very sceptical when we are rolled out for Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Week, Pride Month around Mardi Gras time. Even though it's fantastic and it's a great celebration, we need to do more all year round. Do it all year round. Have First Nations people come and speak to you when it's not Rec Week or NAIDOC Week. Have a queer presentation when it's not Pride Month or around Mardi Gras time. And actually, that's the time for allies to step up, actually. It's particularly Rec Week. It's like, well, why are First Nations people doing it? We live it and breathe it. This is your week. This is your week, allies. So that's where it's important to kind of embed it, have it from the top and the bottom. At all levels, and for everybody to know where they stand, and to give them the freedom to be able to express that and live authentically. I've got an Aboriginal flag at my desk, and also a Pride flag, because during Mardi Gras last year we kind of rolled out all these things. We've got a proud flag, so it's like when I bring visitors in, it's like, guess where my desk is. But it's also just a symbol of safety. This is a safe space.